3 people were shot at a baby shower over an argument about gifts. On the 18th of September 2021, Isaiah Hampton and the mother of his unborn child had a baby shower. An argument broke out when allegedly the 25-year-old got abusive with one of the guests. They started arguing over gifts and the woman allegedly slapped him across the face. He then began shoving her and 3 guests tackled him to the ground. He then allegedly pulled out a weapon and opened fire. Now, a 19-year-old guest was shot in the leg, a man was shot in the torso, and a 16-year-old boy was also hit. Thankfully, none of the injuries were life-threatening. Police then tracked him down along with the expectant mother. He claims that he acted in self-defense, and as far as I can see, the trial hasn't actually happened yet. This is how a woman's quick thinking saved her own life. On the 22nd of August at around 5 p.m, a customer was just minding their own business at a petrol station in northern Arizona. The customer was then signaled to by a woman. The woman passed the customer a note begging for their help. The yellow post-it note stated, "Help, call 911, blue Honda van." There was also a phone number and the direction that they were apparently headed in. The woman had been allegedly kidnapped 170 miles away in Phoenix. The shocked customer called the police straight away and described to them what the woman was wearing and what her alleged captor looked like. Police immediately tracked them down and detained 41-year-old Jacob Wilhoit. He is now being charged with threatening, aggravated assault, unlawful imprisonment, kidnapping, and other crimes. Jacob had been allegedly wearing a wig and posing as an Uber driver when he kidnapped the woman. It's believed that he then put her in his van and tied her up with zip ties. Police stated the victim is still shaken up, but I think she did an amazing job and ended up doing everything right.
I died after eating sushi at only 15 years old. My name is Luca Piscopo, and I am from Italy. On November 23, 2021, I went to an Asian restaurant with 3 of my friends to have my favorite food. Once there, I ordered sushi, as it is my preference. Our meal went extremely well, and we enjoyed the food. However, once I got home, I started feeling unwell with fever, vomiting, and diarrhea. My friends also had similar but less intense symptoms. After a week, I began to feel better, and all the symptoms disappeared. However, on December 2, 2021, 9 days after our restaurant outing, I suddenly died from cardiac arrest. My parents claim not to understand the reason for my death, as I had an impeccable lifestyle. Since my friends also experienced symptoms of food poisoning, it is highly likely that my death is linked to the sushi I ate. An investigation is underway to understand what happened, and the restaurant manager has been placed under investigation. And in your opinion, what happened? Do you think it could be a deadly bacterium like Salmonella?
These are videos humans were never meant to see. Okay, so we all know how spiders make webs and how amazing they look, but have you ever seen a spider actually make a web? If not, I'm about to show you a video of a spider making a web and it's absolutely mind-blowing. These things are amazing, and here's the video.
I killed babies while I was a nurse. My name is Lucy Letby, and I was 26 years old when I committed these horrible acts. I was a neonatal nurse at the Countess of Chester Hospital in the United Kingdom. I don't know exactly why, but one day I decided to kill some babies. To do it, I would wait until I was alone in the hospital room with the babies. Then I would inject air or a large amount of insulin into the poor infants who had done nothing to deserve this, or I would inject an overdose of milk into their stomachs, which almost inevitably killed them. In total, I killed 7 infants and was accused of attempting to kill 6 others in 2015 and 2016. But it wasn't until 2018 that I was first arrested in connection with the unusually frequent deaths of infants at the hospital. However, I always managed to get out without anything happening to me. It was only on August 21st, 2023, that I was found guilty after investigators conducted thorough investigations and discovered what I had done. I was then sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of release, and I am now one of the 3 women in the United Kingdom to receive such a sentence.
Rachel Hudson was 19 years old when she killed her terminally ill mom and then texted a photo of her dead body to her dad. It was Thanksgiving in 2013, and the family had been going through some extremely difficult times. Rachel's mom, 58-year-old Susan Lee, was terminally ill and suffering from congestive heart failure, kidney failure, and diabetes, and Rachel had been her primary caretaker since she was 9 years old. On Thanksgiving night, Rachel got into an argument with her father and later recalled feeling suicidal and like nothing was ever going to get better. And when her dad left to go Black Friday shopping early the next morning, Rachel would make a decision that would change her family forever. Once her dad left, Rachel planned to end her own life, so she loaded a shotgun that she kept in her closet. According to Rachel, she then started worrying about her mom finding her body and thought that if she killed herself, she would be killing her mom anyway. And that's when Rachel went into her mom's bedroom and told her, quote, "I'm sorry, this is what has to happen," end quote. She then fatally shot her mom. Rachel texted her dad and told her what she'd done, but he didn't believe her, so she took a photo of her mom's dead body and then texted it to him. Rachel was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to 18 years in prison. She was originally sentenced to 50 years, but at the trial it was argued that she suffered from an undiagnosed mental illness, which played a factor in the murder and ultimately lessened her sentence.
Contrary to popular belief, I'm a serial murderer who has even devoured some of my victims. I'm Tamara Samsonova, nicknamed the Murderous Grandmother. Once an elderly woman living in Russia, over the years I've committed atrocious acts. I took the lives of several individuals in various ways, using poisoning, suffocation and dismemberment, including with 2 knives and a saw while my victim was still alive. I subsequently boiled his head and hands. 6 of these crimes were motivated by a dark, unhealthy force within me, an irresistible urge to cause harm. One day, my misdeeds were discovered. Evidence linking me to the murders I'd committed was found by investigators. I was apprehended and brought to justice. At my trial, I listened to the terrifying testimonies of the victims' families, observing the pain and grief I had inflicted. Yet, despite this, a particular satisfaction, a kind of perverse pride, persisted within me. Finally convicted of my crimes, I was sentenced to life imprisonment. Today, my story remains a dark chapter in Russian criminal history, arousing curiosity about the transformation of a seemingly harmless grandmother into a ruthless killer.
I need to show you how the act mirrored Gypsy Rose Blanchard's life. And specifically, I want to show you one scene because the show does not hold back. So a few years ago, Gypsy Rose was interviewed by Dr. Phil while she was still in prison. And he had a lot of questions about Nicholas Godejan, who was her boyfriend at the time that went on to attack her mother. Specifically, he asks about the first time they met in real life, and the story is wild. Watch this. Also, I've been covering a lot of the real dark stories behind TV and film, so you should follow along.
Were you alone with him at the movie?
No, my mother was sitting right next to us, and then my mother got increasingly angry because I was paying more attention to him than I was to her.
Did you have sexual relations with him at the movie?
Yes, sir.
Where was your mother?
She was in the auditorium. We had went to the bathroom. I wheeled myself to the bathroom and he followed while my mother was still in the auditorium.
And she knew he was following?
Yes. She thought that he was going to get popcorn.
It might be shocking to hear and even more shocking to watch in the show, but Gypsy was a real teenage girl with real teenage girl feelings. She only had this one chance to see her boyfriend at the time, and she did what I think a lot of teens would do. The show is pretty accurate, and it shows just how shocking this entire situation was for Gypsy Rose. I might have to do a whole series on the times that it mirrors real life.
This is the shocking turn of events after a man picked up this college student from her home. Ali Costile was a 21-year-old from St. Louis. It was 2019 and she was a marketing student and campus fitness instructor. She was beautiful and well-liked. On the 20th of July that year, a tragedy would unfold. Ali's roommate Lauren reportedly saw Ali when she came home around midnight. Early on the Sunday morning, she was seen on CCTV at a convenience shop. She could be seen giving a man a hug. Tragically, her body was discovered at 10:23 a.m. in Buford's Ridge. She had multiple gunshot wounds. Police had to act fast to find any potential suspects, and they focused in on Allie's on-off boyfriend. This was 22-year-old Brandon Thiesfeld. He was known to go to that area regularly, as many students did. Allie's friends also reported to police that he was known to be quite disrespectful towards women. Brandon was arrested and investigators started examining any potential motive for Allie's killing. It was discovered that the pair were frequently intimate, and Allie messaged Brandon to tell him she thought she may be pregnant. She texted him a photo days later of an inconclusive pregnancy test. She then asked him if he would meet up with her, which he declined. He texted her asking her to get rid of the pregnancy and then later agreed to meet up with her. It transpired that he picked her up, drove her to Buford's Ridge and shot her. An autopsy confirmed she wasn't actually pregnant. He pled guilty in court and was given life in prison.
Do you remember the time when rapper T.I. stated to the news that he has his daughter's hymen checked yearly? This is one of the most disturbing and just flat out creepy things that I think a celebrity has ever openly talked about, so let's kind of take a look at what he said. So this all came out back in 2019 when T.I. was on a podcast called Ladies Like Us. When the hosts asked T.I. about how he was talking to his kids about sex education, he had this to say. I'm going to read this to you. This is a direct quote. Not only have we had the conversation, we have yearly trips to the gynecologist to check her hymen. Yes, I go with her. I will say, as of her 18th birthday, her hymen is still intact. Now, keep in mind, he doubled down on this, and this is a direct quote from T.I. Right after he said that, he said, so then they come and say, well, I just want you to know that there are other ways besides sex that the hymen can be broken, like bike riding, athletics, horseback riding, and other forms of athletic physical activity. So I say, look, doc, she don't ride no horses, she don't ride no bikes, she don't play no sports. Just check the hymen, please, and give me back my results expeditiously. Obviously, this entire thing was incredibly disturbing, and even though the hosts of the podcast and the people who put that show out edited the comments out, it was already said and people were reporting on what T.I. said. I don't know about you guys, but I think that this is just very, very bizarre and disturbing to say about your own child, especially publicly on a podcast. I mean, I don't know. This has always grossed me out. Let me know what you think about these comments in the comment section.
This is the shocking moment mother of two, Irina Garcia, was stabbed to death while she was sleeping, just a few feet away from her daughter. This is Irina just 37 minutes before cuddling her newborn in bed, not realising that that would be the last time. She'd welcomed her newborn daughter in October last year, just 2 weeks before her murder. The most shocking thing is that her killer was her 13-year-old son, Derek Rosa. He'd gone to bed around 10 p.m, the same time as his mum that night, and he'd waited until she was asleep. He then grabbed a kitchen knife, entered her room and stabbed her 47 times while his baby sister lay just feet away sleeping. He then sent this selfie to a friend showing his hand covered in blood with the word goodbye. He had planned to shoot himself with his stepfather's gun, but after holding it to his head, he said he couldn't go through with it. He waited around half an hour and then called 911. He said he needed an ambulance to be sent to his address as he'd just stabbed his mum. When the dispatcher asked if Irina was still breathing, he replied, "She's dead, miss." Derek's police interviews have been released in which he admits killing his mother, and what strikes me is how calm he is. He's talking and answering questions as if nothing's happened. He's appeared in court this week, supported by family members, surprisingly. His grandmother was there, she was seen blowing him a kiss, and other family members were seen waving at him. He smiled at them. He's being charged as an adult, and his trial date is set for February.
Kristen Smart vanished after attending a college party. 2 decades later, ground-penetrating technology solved the mystery. Kristen Smart was a 19-year-old student at California Polytech State University. The year was 1996, and on the 25th of May, Kristen got dropped off at a party. She was seen leaving roughly 2 a.m. with fellow student Paul Flores. On the 28th of May, she was reported missing after friends and family failed to get hold of her. As Paul was the last one to have been seen with her, he was questioned by police. He insisted that he had gone with her to his dorm and then they'd parted ways. A huge search was undertaken to find the missing student. Helicopters were deployed and cadaver dogs were used. Worryingly, in Kristin's room was her purse. This indicated that she hadn't planned to leave. Now, Paul was identified as a person of interest quite early on in the case. He did, though, deny any involvement. With no sign of Kristin for an agonising 6 years, her family declared her legally dead in 2002. The investigation was still ongoing, though, and cadaver dogs continued to scour the area. The years continued to roll on by, and police conducted over 90 interviews between 2011 to 2020. Paul was still considered to be a prime suspect, and investigators started looking into his dad, Ruben Flores, too. In 2021, ground-penetrating radar was used on Ruben's property. Investigators made a huge breakthrough. They found biological evidence indicating Kristin's body was once buried beneath the deck of Ruben Flores' home. Paul was charged with murder and Ruben was charged with accessory after the fact. Shockingly, also date R substances were found at Paul's home, and homemade videos showing him R-ing young women. Both Paul and his dad pleaded not guilty. Paul was found guilty as charged and given 25 years in prison. His dad was actually found not guilty of hiding Kristin's body. This is how a Snapchat selfie helped to catch a killer. Tristan Bailey was a 13-year-old cheerleader and student at the Patriot Oaks Academy in Florida. It was 2021, and on the 9th of May, she had agreed to make breakfast for her mum for Mother's Day. Her and her sister Sophia were excited to treat her. Sophia had already started prepping breakfast but noticed Tristan wasn't home. Her family reported her missing at 10 a.m. that day. The teenager had last been spotted at 1:15 a.m. in St. Johns County, wearing her cheerleading outfit. Tragically, later that day, her body was found on Saddlestone Drive. She'd been brutally stabbed to death. Now, Tristan did not go down without a fight, and she had multiple defensive wounds on her body. She also had the word karma written on her ankle. Now, during the hunt for Tristan and before her body was found, her 14-year-old classmate, Aidan Fucci, was arrested. He actually lived nearby to where her body was discovered shortly after. When police had him in their car, he actually took a Snapchat selfie. He threw up a peace sign and wrote, "Hey guys, has anybody seen Tristan lately?" He also took videos smiling, saying that he was having fun. Officers searched Aidan's home and found his blood-soaked clothing along with a knife sheath. CCTV footage also showed Aidan with Tristan on the night that she was murdered. He was then captured later on his own. A knife was later retrieved from a pond nearby and it was sent for testing. This showed that it was a match for Tristan's stab wounds. Aidan's mum, Crystal Smith, was actually found to have tampered with evidence after being captured on video washing his trousers. Aidan was found to be heavily using substances and was reportedly a violent person. Disturbing reports also came from Aidan's friends who said that he thought killing someone would be satisfying. They'd initially shrugged these comments off as just kids being kids. While awaiting trial, he threatened to stab another inmate. He did eventually plead guilty to first-degree murder, and the judge stated that the crime had no real motive. Aidan was given a life sentence which can be reviewed once he has spent 25 years in prison. A shocking Google search that this woman made before she was murdered helped to solve her killing. Jennifer Rothwell was a 28-year-old woman from Missouri. It was 2019 and she had been married to her husband Beau since 2015. The pair lived together in St. Louis, and Beau reported her missing on the 12th of November. He rang police to say that she had never returned home from work that day. He said he'd seen her shortly before she left for work at around 6:30. Worryingly, investigators found Jennifer's abandoned car with her phone inside shortly after. Police started looking into who could have potentially hurt Jennifer in some way, and they started looking inside her husband's truck. Concerningly, they smelled a strong smell of bleach, like it had recently been cleaned. They then turned their attention to the pair's home, and they found the smell was in there as well. The forensic team also found traces of blood and hair in the basement. After it was sent off for testing, it came back as a match for Jennifer. Police then looked into Jennifer's search history and found that she had looked up what to do if your husband is upset you are pregnant. They felt that this pointed to a potential motive for murder. It was revealed that Jennifer was around 6 weeks pregnant when she vanished. On November the 18th, Beau led police to her remains. At his trial, he admitted to killing Jennifer but said that he did not do it intentionally. He stated that his wife found out he was having an affair and they got into a heated argument. He claimed that Jennifer had actually told him that her unborn baby was not his. He said he was angry and hit her with a mallet. He then drove for an hour in his car with her body inside and buried her in the woods. A paternity test later disproved the theory that the baby was not his. At his trial, another piece of evidence was presented, and this was a list that Beau had written of pros and cons of ending the marriage. The pros included better life, more respect, and fresh start. The cons included Jennifer and her family, have to move, half my assets and money, and my family disappointment. Beau was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison.
This is the Bifor Dolphin incident, one of the worst deaths imaginable, explained. The Bifor Dolphin was a semi-submersible deep-sea driller. This deep-sea driller could reach depths of 1,500 feet underwater. Now, at around 4 a.m. on November 5th, 1983, 2 of the divers were in the saturation chamber resting. Now, to be honest with you, I'm not really familiar on how this all works, but I'll try and explain it. But 2 divers were returning to the Biford, and they were in a transfer capsule that clamped onto the bottom here. And typical procedure would have them climb up the diving bell, but they would first have to seal that off to depressurize the chamber. Now, one of the divers was trying to close the hatch, but before he could do that, the other diver released the clamp that was securing the capsule to the trunk. And what happened was immediate and absolutely horrifying. So because of that one minor slip-up, the entire capsule violently decompressed. And it then completely launched away from the trunk. And the pressure that was already in the chamber went down from 9 atmospheres to 1. And this is where it gets gruesome, and this is where we hope this death was instant. To kind of illustrate what happened, somebody illustrated this image. One of the divers, because of the depressurization, was forced through a 24-inch opening. So this sliver right here that you see, the crab was sucked into it instantly and was gone in a second. And that is exactly what happened to one of the divers. And he was exposed to forces about 25 tons. And his body was absolutely mangled. His body parts were just blown all over the rig. His spine was found outside of the rig, his liver was dissected. And I know you guys are gonna Google this, so yes, there is a picture of his remains. And to be honest, it was kinda weird how easy you could find it. The other divers were completely boiled alive. They had lumps of white fat clogging their arteries and their veins, which led to their blood to flash boil. The autopsy stated that all of these deaths were instant, and that's all we could hope for these people. You really can't fathom how bad this incident was until you see the remains of the victim. It's absolutely sickening, and this is definitely one of the worst deaths imaginable.
What's a crime that happened near you that everyone should know about? I'll go first. This is Kai Zhuang. He's a Chinese foreign exchange student that was staying in Riverdale, Utah when he was cyber kidnapped last week. Kai was reported missing by his high school in Riverdale last Thursday after his family in China told school officials that they received a ransom note and a photo of Kai being held captive and in danger. The ransom note demanded $80,000, which his family paid. Upon investigating, Riverdale police went to the home of Kai's host family, but according to them, they had no idea that Kai was missing. They told authorities that he was sleeping in his bed Wednesday night and could hear him in his room Thursday morning. Police initially thought that he had been forcibly taken from his host home and was being held against his will, but that was not the case. Just a week prior, Kai was stopped by police in Provo, Utah, where they were concerned for his safety for some reason. He was purchasing camping gear and he was ultimately returned to his host family. After learning about this encounter, police used phone data and bank records to piece together where Kai could have possibly gone, because at this point it seemed as if he was trying to go off-grid. Just Sunday morning, Kai was found alive in a makeshift tent in the Utah mountains just outside of Brigham City. According to police, he was very scared and cold as there was no source of heat in the tent outside of a blanket. He also had very little food and water. Inside the tent, police also found multiple phones, which they believe he used to take the photos that were sent to his family in China. Kai told police that he was told by the cyber kidnappers to isolate himself, which he agreed to because he was scared that they were going to hurt him or his family. He said that he was being controlled and manipulated by these kidnappers for weeks, even during the encounter with Provo police, but he didn't tell them or his host family because he was scared. Riverdale police state that he was specifically targeted because he was a foreign exchange student, and he became the subject of an international online kidnapping scheme. After his rescue, he was cleared medically at the scene, made contact with his family back home, and he requested a warm cheeseburger to eat. According to the FBI, cyber kidnapping schemes are happening more and more across the US, and these cyber kidnappers are specifically targeting Chinese exchange students online, threatening their families back home. If you don't know, cyber kidnapping is when an online kidnapper or attacker tells a victim to isolate themselves and to provide them with photos as if they were being held captive. They then send these photos to the victim's family members in exchange for payment, and the victims usually go along with this out of fear of themselves or their families being harmed. Authorities are urging anyone who may be a victim of cyber kidnapping to stop contact with the suspect, don't send them money, and to immediately contact local authorities.
This is Jellyfish Arms, one of the worst prison videos ever, explained. Before I begin, I just want to say this video is an extremely hard watch and I don't recommend looking for it. The video that I'm about to explain is under 1.5 minutes long, and as you play the video, you see a steel barred jail cell which looks like it's holding several men. It's hard to see what's going on, but it appears multiple men are straining and holding down one man. On the outside of the cell are 3 inmates. 2 are holding what appears to be 2 thick wooden sticks or metal pipes. It's hard to tell because of the quality, but I think it's 2 metal pipes. It's hard to explain, but the man who is being held down has his arms extended through the prison bars. To visualize it, picture yourself in a jail cell and sticking your arms to the bars and extending your arms out. One of the men outside of the cell is holding a rope that is tied to the victim's arm, and he is pulling it tightly so that the arm is completely outstretched and straight. The 2 men with the metal pipes then start hitting the victim's outstretched arm. After every hit, you see lumps appear on the arm almost instantly. They are hitting him so hard and often that lacerations appear. The screaming from the victim gets more and more intense, and after several strikes, the man holding the rope reduces the tension and shakes the victim's arm. You can see that he has several bones broken in his forearm and his arm is partially floppy at this point. It's worth noting that a bed sheet has been placed and pulled over the victim's head in order to reduce the screaming. Once again, they strike the same arm several more times. The man holding the rope then unties the arm as the prisoner pulls it back into the cell. His forearm is completely floppy and he struggles to even pull it through the cell bars. And as you guessed, it doesn't get any better from here. They then take the other arm, tie it up, and pull it through the cell bars once again so the arm is outstretched. They then strike the arm multiple times, and despite the loud nature of the inmates and their attempt to muffle the victim's screams, you can still hear them, and that mixed with the sound the metal bar makes when it hits the victim's arm is just sickening. At 1 minute and 26 seconds into the video, it finally concludes. This is a terrible watch and there's little to no backstory behind it, but many speculate it was just a normal gang attack, but others say it was a punishment for stealing in prison, which makes sense as they were incapacitating his arms. Regardless, it's a very sickening video and I don't recommend watching it.
Bill Clinton allegedly sexually assaulted this woman in 1978, so let's talk about it. This is Juanita Broderick. She is a big critic, a very outspoken woman who has stood up against Bill Clinton, and she has a very, very disturbing story to share. In fact, she has written an entire book about this encounter titled, "You'd Better Put Some Ice on That, How I Survived Being Raped by Bill Clinton." So in the year 1974, Juanita bought a nursing home. She had gone to nursing school and she wanted to operate her own nursing home. And it was in the year 1978 when Bill Clinton visited her nursing home for his 1978 gubernatorial campaign. So according to Juanita, she stated that she wanted to volunteer for the campaign. She got contact information from Bill Clinton, who was the Attorney General at the time, and she was then invited to visit the campaign office in Little Rock, Arkansas. She contacted the campaign office again a few weeks later when she was in Little Rock, and allegedly they told her that he wasn't in the office that day, but Bill Clinton could meet her at a coffee shop. According to Juanita, though, when Bill met her at the coffee shop, he stated that they should have coffee in her room instead of the lobby to avoid crowds of reporters and people. And she agreed, and they went up to her room. And it was apparently in this hotel room where this disturbing act unfolded. So according to Juanita, she and Bill talked for a little bit. He mentioned how he wanted to renovate a prison that they could see from the hotel room window, and then the unspeakable happened. According to Juanita, Bill tried to come kiss her, and she expressly stated that she wasn't interested because she was married, but Bill was unrelenting. Allegedly, she begged him to stop, but he pressed on. He kissed her and started biting her lip, shoved her onto the bed, and just kept biting on her lower lip as hard as he could. And when everything was said and done, he got up, straightened himself up. She was crying on the bed, and then he looked at her and said, "You better get some ice on that," before walking out the door. Now, you could easily just say that Juanita was making all of this up, but at the time she was actually sharing her hotel room with her friend and fellow employee named Norma Rogers. When Norma returned to the hotel room, she stated that she found Juanita in a state of shock. Her pantyhose was ripped at the crotch, and her lip was swollen as if she had been hit or bitten. She also stated that Juanita immediately told her about what happened. So at the end of the day, this allegation was never actually fully proven to have really happened, but this is not the only allegation that has ever been made about Bill Clinton. And I'm not even talking about all the Epstein stuff that's coming out right now. But if you want me to talk more about this stuff, let me know and I'll make a part 2 in this series.
This little girl was kidnapped in 2018 and has just been found. On the 25th of October 2018, 4-year-old Aranza Lopez was on a supervised visit with her biological mum. Her mum, Esmeralda, was being investigated over abuse allegations, so Aranza was actually in foster care at the time. It was arranged that the pair would have a supervised visit at a Washington shopping centre. However, during the visit, Esmeralda requested to take Aranza to the toilets and used the opportunity to snatch the little girl in a stolen vehicle. The FBI were notified and a huge search for Aranza and even advertised a $10,000 reward. It wasn't until a year later that Esmeralda was found and arrested, but there was still no sign of the little girl. That was until last month. She was recovered by Mexican authorities in February in western Mexico. In 2021, Esmeralda was actually extradited back to Washington state and pled guilty to second-degree kidnapping and robbery. She was sentenced to 20 months in prison.
We hear a lot about what Jeffrey Epstein has done, but who was he? Let's take a look at his past. Jeffrey Epstein was born on January 20th, 1953 in Brooklyn, New York. He came from a working-class family. His father worked for the New York City Parks and Recreation Department, and his mom was a stay-at-home mom. And everybody who knew Jeffrey Epstein when he was younger only has good things to say about him. They said he was a sweet guy, he was quiet and nerdy, and he even was given the nickname Epi as a child. Jeffrey also started playing the piano at the age of 5, and he was regarded as being a very talented musician. He eventually graduated high school in 1969 and then went on to university, but he never finished his degree. Now, this is where it gets interesting. So in the year 1974, Jeffrey Epstein starts teaching physics and mathematics at a local school. The headmaster of the school was known for hiring random people, and it's unclear how Jeffrey Epstein got hired, but he wasn't qualified to be teaching there. And according to former students who had him as a teacher, he paid extremely close attention to the young female students. Obviously, all these girls were minors at the time that he was teaching, since this was high school, but he was also known to show up at parties where minors were drinking and hang out with them. But eventually, through his teaching job, Jeffrey Epstein was introduced to this man, Alan Greenberg. Alan Greenberg was the CEO of the investment bank Bear Stearns, and his son and daughter attended the school that Jeffrey Epstein was teaching at. And eventually, once it was found out that Jeffrey Epstein wasn't qualified for the job and his performance was poor, he was fired, and he then was recruited by Alan to join Bear Stearns. Now, this is where Jeffrey Epstein moves into the financial world and starts making a lot of money. He eventually worked his way up the ladder at Bear Stearns, but was eventually let go because of a violation with his work. He then founded his own investment company, and this is where things get really strange. Jeffrey told friends at the time that he oftentimes worked for governments to help them recover embezzled funds, and he would also work for people who had embezzled funds. He also told some of his friends at the time that he worked as an intelligence agent. One fact that could point out that this might have been true is that Jeffrey Epstein had possession of an Australian passport with his photo on it but a different name. His place of residence was also listed as being Saudi Arabia. This relates back to one of the later cases in Jeffrey Epstein's life when a U.S. district attorney stated that they were initially told to leave Jeffrey Epstein's case alone because he was considered to be a part of intelligence. There are a lot of connections that do point to Jeffrey Epstein possibly being some sort of intelligence agent, but if you want me to cover some of those, I can make a whole different TikTok. Eventually, though, Jeffrey Epstein was this rich bachelor living in New York City. You can even look at one of these ads that was taking out about Jeffrey Epstein looking for a woman. This is a very eerie ad considering what he went on to do with his life. And if you want me to talk more about Jeffrey Epstein's life, let me know in the comments below. Make it part 2.
This woman screamed, "I don't want to die," as she was dragged to her death in a horrifying theme park incident. Kelty Byrne was a Canadian student animal trainer and competitive swimmer. She was working at Sealand of the Pacific to earn extra money, and this involved being trained to work with orcas, otherwise known as killer whales. In controversial theme parks such as Sealand of the Pacific and SeaWorld, huge animals are either bred in captivity or traumatically captured and ripped apart from their families and natural habitats for humans' entertainment. On February the 20th, 1991, Kelty was working a shift and 3 whales were in one of the pools, including the infamous Tilikum. In a horrific turn of events, Kelty accidentally slipped and fell into the whale pool and attempted to grab onto the edge and save herself. However, before she could do so, she was grabbed by one of the whales that dragged her into the pool. The 3 whales then began throwing Kelty around, with many speculating that they may have simply thought this was a game. Others theorised that the whales were so traumatised and angered by their lives in tiny little pools that they took it out on Kelty. She was dragged under the water and then back up, screaming, "I don't want to die." After this horrific ordeal, she eventually drowned. It's reported that she was absolutely covered in bruises, was completely battered, and also covered in teeth marks.
Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. At least that's what a lot of people think. Today we're going to take a look at some of the evidence that may refute the official story. And you can decide for yourself what you think about this whole thing, but let me tell you, some of this stuff is pretty crazy. If you want me to do a whole series about Jeffrey Epstein, his life and his crimes, let me know in the comments section below, but today we're talking about his death. On July 6, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was arrested when he was leaving his private jet, and a little bit over a month later, he was found dead in his jail cell. When Epstein was arrested, this was absolutely national news. Everybody was talking about it. It was such a crazy story because he had so many powerful connections. He had been really good friends with the President of the United States at the time, tech moguls, and loads of other celebrities and politicians from across the planet. So everybody in prison knew that this guy needed to be guarded, right? I mean, he was literally the most high-profile prisoner in America. So this is where the story starts to get a little strange. So according to various prison psychologists that had talked to Jeffrey Epstein while he was in prison, he said that he didn't want to take his own life. Many times he expressed to these people that he didn't like pain, he was a coward, it was against his religion, and that he would literally never do that to himself. And I know that it is possible that he was manipulating people into thinking that he wouldn't do it just so that he could do it, but it is interesting that he was talking about this all the time. So the mistakes surrounding Epstein's arrest and eventual death started right away. On a prison intake form, he was listed as a black inmate, obviously he was white, and it also stated that he had no prior sex offense convictions, even though he was a registered sex offender. Like I said, this is the most high-profile inmate in America, so why would they make these mistakes? There were also multiple phone calls placed by Jeffrey Epstein that were not logged and not recorded by the prison system. They have no real record of who he called or who he talked to, and that is obviously a blatant violation of any prison's policy. For the entire month that he was held in prison, all the psychologists agreed that he may have seemed a little down, but he didn't seem like he was about to take his own life. On the night that Epstein took his own life, he made a social phone call. This phone call was not recorded, it was not logged, like I said, as prison policy states that it should be. And later on, the unit manager asked who Epstein had called, and he said his own mother, which didn't make sense because Epstein's mom died in 2004. In reality, that phone call was placed to his girlfriend at the time, Karina, who was a dentist from New York. There are 3 people that have knowledge of this phone call. None of them have stated that Epstein gave any indication that he was about to take his life. And it's interesting because the New York Times asked the Bureau of Prisons for Epstein's phone logs from prison, and they released them, but that phone call was not on the logs. After this, Epstein was escorted back into his cell at 7:49 p.m. by a guard named Tova Noel. And it was at this point in the night when the story takes a turn, and all of the controversy really begins. I'm going to cover all the stuff that surrounds his actual death in the next part of this TikTok series, so follow me if you want to hear the stuff from his jail cell that's inconsistent with the official story.
This is one of the most disgusting and evil cases I've heard of recently. On the 7th of December 2017, teacher Thelma Boinville was desperately trying to make some extra money. She was doing a cleaning job to earn extra money for her family, and the job suited her as her 8-year-old could come along and play while she worked. This was really handy as it meant she didn't have to fork out for childcare. She set out cleaning some holiday homes on the day in question, and her daughter waited in the car. The spot was a lovely scenic place called Kelky Beach. However, instead of walking in on a normal holiday rental to clean, she walked into a nightmare. Stephen Brown and his girlfriend Hayley Dangerand were in the middle of robbing the place. They were scouring through drawers and wardrobes, hunting for valuables to steal. With Thelma walking in, their plan had been foiled. They decided they needed to dispose of their only witness. The evil pair tied up the mother, whose daughter waited unsuspectingly in the car outside. They used a machete, a knife, and a hammer to murder the innocent woman. But the horror was far from over. They exited the holiday home and came across Thelma's young daughter waiting in the car. They callously told the young girl, "We killed your mum," and then bound her up and gagged her. Sickeningly, they then took the 8-year-old into the home where they'd killed her mum and left her there tied up. The 2 Australian tourists who were renting the holiday home then came back and found the crime scene. The 2 killers were tracked down hours later in Thelma's car, which they'd stolen and driven off in. Hayley was actually wearing her victim's earrings at the time. They actually begged for the officers to just shoot them and end their lives, but they wouldn't get away that easily. Thelma's husband, Kevin, wasn't actually allowed to see his wife's body due to the extent of her injuries. The autopsy revealed that she'd fought for her life, with many defensive wounds indicating a struggle. Since the murder, Stephen and Hayley have both tried to blame each other. Stephen was found guilty of second-degree murder and apparently showed no emotion as the verdict was read out. Hayley is currently awaiting trial.
I'm going to warn everybody right now, the case that we're about to cover is easily one of the most disturbing true crime stories I've ever heard in my life, so viewer discretion is really advised for this one. This is Kevin Davis. He was 18 years old back in 2014 when this horrific event took place. Kevin lived here in Corpus Christi, Texas, and shared an apartment with his mother, Kimberly, and his sister, Destiny. On May 26, 2014, Kevin snapped. He had been having homicidal thoughts for a long time, but on that particular day, he decided to bring his dreams and his fantasies into reality. On that morning, Kevin told his mother, Kimberly, that he wanted to unalive himself, and she told him that she couldn't stop him if he wanted to. After hearing this unexpected response from his mother, Kevin went into a rage. He grabbed a cord and attempted to strangle his mother on the couch where she was sitting. But his mom, Kimberly, managed to fight him off, and in a panic, Kevin went into the other room and grabbed a hammer. Now, this is where it gets really disturbing, so if you're still here with me and you have a weak stomach, don't keep listening. Kevin then bashed his own mother's skull in with the hammer, hitting her at least 20 times, and he then grabbed a knife from the kitchen and inserted the knife into the head wound. At that point, Kimberly's head was opened up, she had a massive head wound, and her brain was exposed, and Kevin stuck his hand into his own mother's head and played with her brains. He later told detectives that it felt like putty. Now, after his mother was dead, Kevin dragged her corpse into another room and her, which is unbelievably shocking and disgusting. After all this was said and done, he went to a neighbor's house, told them to call 911, told them that he had just murdered someone, and he was arrested without incident. When Kevin ultimately arrived at the police station, he was brutally honest with investigators about his crimes. I listened to the entire interrogation, and I cannot unhear some of the things that he told investigators. It's vile and shocking. But at one point, he smiles at the investigators with a little grin and says, "Yes, I guess I lost my..." to a corpse. After his trial, he was handed down a sentence of life in prison. He's still alive. He's still in Texas right now, and he even admitted to investigators that if he was given the chance, if he were out on the street again, he would kill again. I'm sorry to have to fill your guys' minds with this stuff, but this is a truly disturbing case that I can't stop thinking about because of how horrific it is, and yeah, I cannot believe that this happened.
If I didn't know this was a true crime case, I would think it was a disturbing horror film. On the morning of the 7th of October 2022, a barefoot woman was running around Excelsior Springs, Missouri, bashing on people's doors. Witnesses describe her looking like she came straight from a horror film and she was calling for help. She'd been beaten, held captive, and SA'd for weeks. The woman was a shocking sight. She was covered in injuries and was wearing a bin bag. Disturbingly, she was gasping for breath as she had a very tight metal collar locked around her neck. It was a nurse who opened the door to her and let her come in. The nurse started to call police, and at this point the woman panicked. She warned her that the captor would kill her and claimed that he had killed her 2 friends. When police got there, the woman explained that a man called Timothy had captured her the month prior. He'd been holding her hostage this whole time. She said he'd been keeping her locked in the basement and had been SAing her. Disturbingly, she told police that he actually had a young son who lived at the house with him. When Timothy had taken his young son to school the one day, she used it as her opportunity to escape. Police made their way to the home of 39-year-old Timothy Haslett Jr. and found the property did in fact have a basement like the woman described. Timothy was arrested and is facing 9 charges including first-degree kidnapping. He's being held on a $3 million bond and faces 5 life sentences. Before his arrest, police were actually called to his address 3 times. Twice they were asked to do welfare checks, and this was from an employer and also family members. Police have searched his home with cadaver dogs and they haven't yet released what they know.
This is Peter Scully, one of the worst pedophiles in world history. I'm about to tell you his story, but seriously guys, this one is incredibly disturbing. It's so dark, and viewer discretion is really advised for this video. So Peter Scully, he's still alive. He was from Australia, he had a family there, but he was engaging in criminal activities and he eventually fled the country and moved to the Philippines. And this is where the darkness really began. While he was in Australia, Peter Scully started up an international child sex abuse ring. The things that were done to these kids are, I can't even talk about them here on TikTok, but he also started up a pay-per-view video service. And with these videos, he was producing CP, but one of the most extreme forms of CP that can possibly be produced. So how did all this happen? Well, when he was out living in the Philippines, Peter Scully had 2 Filipina girlfriends. They would go out to the streets, they would find kids that needed money or looked impoverished, they would bring them back to the house they shared with Peter, and the things that went on afterwards are literally unspeakable. Remember, like I mentioned before, Peter was the head of an international ring of people that enjoyed the abuse of kids, and he provided videos for these clients. But his most infamous video was titled Daisy's Destruction. This video that he produced was so extreme, so hardcore, that people on the internet, when they heard about what happened in the video, literally thought that it was an urban legend, and they thought that there was no way this could be real. This is an actual screenshot of the beginning of the video. This is a screenshot from the very beginning of the video. In the video, 3 young girls are repeatedly tortured for hours and hours on end by Peter Scully and his 2 girlfriends from the Philippines. They are beaten, they are sexually abused. I can't even describe, like I said on TikTok, some of the things that happened in this video. And 18-month-old Daisy. Now keep in mind that all of this was on camera. That's the most disturbing part of this. One of Peter's victims actually ended up dying. They were buried in his house. And this sick individual literally sold that video footage across the world. And what's even more disturbing is that there were lots of people willing to pay to see that video. I'm not kidding. People were paying $10,000 to view this video. That is absolute insanity that there are people that sick out there in the world. And this is only the beginning of the crimes that this guy carried out. Some of the other stuff that we're going to touch on is absolutely disgusting. It's just horrific. And the story of how Peter Scully was eventually identified and arrested is extremely captivating. I'm going to run out of time here on this video, but if you want to see a part 2, let me know below. This story is far from over.
Family of this missing girl found out via the media that she'd been murdered, butchered and sold as kebab meat. This case will put you off ever eating a kebab again. Charlene Downs disappeared aged just 14 years old in November 2003. She was living in Blackpool, UK, and was last seen in an area containing many kebab shops and takeaways. While out with her friends one night, Charlene bumped into her mum. Her mum said that Charlene needed to be home by 10 PM that night, which was quite typical for Charlene. Tragically, this would be the last time that her mum would ever see Charlene alive. When Charlene didn't turn up by 10 PM, her dad went out on his bike looking for her for around half an hour. When he couldn't find her, he just presumed that she'd stayed over at her friend's house and went home and went to sleep. When she still didn't arrive the next morning, her parents started to get worried and they called police. Police, however, said that they could not report this as a missing person until she'd been missing for 48 hours. Eventually, police did start to look for her, but they said that they presumed she was a runaway. The case went cold until 3 years later. Charlene's family were called into a police station. There was news of 2 men who had been arrested, linked with a local takeaway called Funny Boys. They were arrested on suspicion of murder and disposal of Charlene. This is when the family found out some shocking news via the media about what had happened to Charlene. An article published stated that she had been grinded up and sold as kebab meat. One of the brothers of the men who had been arrested had heard them bragging about doing this. Now, Charlene's disappearance actually unearthed the fact that these takeaways were being used as a front for P rings, where men were luring teenagers in with food and alcohol in exchange for things I cannot repeat on this app. When the case against these 2 men went to trial, the jury failed to reach a verdict. The case was then thrown out of court due to apparent lack of physical evidence. One of the reasons for this is how well Charlene's body had obviously been disposed of. Both men who had been charged were given a £250,000 compensation for being falsely trialed. Around a week after the trial, Charlene's mum was actually arrested for stabbing her husband. He declined to press charges, saying that he knew she had been stressed. Members of the family were also charged with racially aggravated assault against the brother of the man who'd been charged with murder, and also punching the man who'd been charged with helping dispose of her body. In August 2017, police arrested a 51-year-old man who lived in Blackpool at the time of Charlene's disappearance. This was on suspicion of murdering her, however, he was released just 2 days later. We still have no justice for Charlene, and nobody is behind bars for her killing.
This island has one of the most disturbing histories in America, and no one really knows the full truth behind it. So like I said before, this island was owned by multi-millionaire Francis Sheldon, pictured right here. And Francis and a number of other local men from Michigan, including this guy, Gerald S. Richards, ran a boys' camp on the island. They would fly kids to the island on this airstrip, kids from the YMCA and other schools and communities in the area. And both the children and the parents of the children who attended this boys' camp were told that this was an island of fun where kids could relax. They had big brothers there. It was going to be totally safe. And this camp ran on this island for a period of years. Then one day, some of the kids who attended the camp began to tell their parents that the counselors or the teachers, the adults that were there on the island, had behaved with them in very, very inappropriate ways. They began telling their friends and parents that they were taken into these cabins pictured here on the island. They were assaulted, they were told to remove all of their clothing, and that there were cameras all over the place. Well, it turns out that this guy, the multi-millionaire with political and business connections in the area, Francis Sheldon, was running a massive CP ring. And they had been abusing the children on this island under the guise of bringing them to a boys' camp for years, recording all of it, selling it across the world. And some of the more affluent clients of their business were even allowed to take trips to the island themselves to see some of these young boys. Now, this story bears an obvious resemblance to the story of Jeffrey Epstein, but there are some very, very strange things that are happening here that nobody knows about, and the government still refuses to talk about to this day. So let's talk about this guy, Gerald S. Richards. He was a gym teacher at a local Catholic school who went down for the crimes, and he was heavily involved with every aspect of this business, if you know what I mean. Well, it seems like through his political and business connections, Francis Sheldon was actually tipped off that he was about to be arrested and raided and charged with these horrific crimes. So Francis, before he could be brought to justice for these crimes, he actually fled the country in a personal plane. He then moved to France, got remarried, and died in Amsterdam, and never had to pay for any of the crimes that were committed here. But it's when we start talking about the murders that this story really starts to blow my mind. So take a good look at this guy, Chris Bush. This is Christopher Bush's father, Harold Lee Bush. Now, he was an executive with General Motors, and the family was obviously extremely wealthy. They were politically connected, and they were very connected to every business in the area. These guys had a lot of power. But back to Christopher Bush. This guy had assaulted a number of children. He'd been let out of prison, let out of jail in a very, very suspicious way multiple times, put on bail for serious offenses. And he was an alleged associate of the crime ring that was happening on North Fox Island. Meaning that, like I said earlier, he was one of those people who could afford to actually fly out to the island to do things himself. I'm out of time. Follow for part 3. This is where it gets juicy.
Shocking case of the Philpotts. On the 11th of May 2012, 6 children were in bed asleep when a huge fire broke out of their home. As smoke roared through the building, Mairead Philpott, the children's mother, called the emergency services. Their dad, Mick Philpott, was reportedly making heroic attempts to try and save them. However, 5 children unfortunately died in the fire, and the eldest actually passed away in hospital later on. At first, this appeared to be a tragic accident, but the truth was soon revealed. The fire had been started intentionally with petrol underneath the letterbox. When word got out about who the children's father was, many people were already familiar with him. Mick Philpott was notorious for being outspoken and provocative, and had appeared on the Jeremy Kyle show. He claimed to have had 2 wives and seemed to be really proud of this. He also had a horrible history of abusive behaviour towards women. He had been convicted for attacking 2 women with a knife and headbutting a female colleague. A press conference was held about the tragedy that had unfolded. Reporters really expected at this point for the Philpotts to come out and appeal to anyone who had any information about the fire. What the Philpotts actually did was just kind of came out and started thanking people. They didn't ask for any help with any information about the case at all. The only thing Mick asked for is to be left alone. If this genuinely had nothing to do with the parents, you would think that they would come out and be desperate for more information. Neighbours from across the road actually went to the police and told them that they had seen Mick during the fire. He was outside pretending to cough, not actually going in trying to help rescue his children. Police were now suspicious enough to try and set a trap for the Philpotts. They kept them in a hotel room and actually bugged the room. The recording reveals Mick quizzing his wife about how convincing she'd been in her police interview. Locals had also spotted the couple in a pub doing karaoke, dancing and drinking shots. Incredibly strange behaviour for two people who just lost their children. It also came out that Mick was reportedly flirting with nurses at the hospital where his son was on a life support machine. The true story of what actually happened was all about Mick Philpott getting revenge on his ex. In early 2012, one of his wives had left him. She walked out with 5 of their children and Mick just could not take this rejection. He wanted to do something to get her back and wanted custody of his 5 children with her. He set the fire up to frame the ex to make it look like she'd done it. He wanted to be the heroic dad to save all his children and for his ex to go to prison for it. Mick got life in prison for this. Mariad got 17 years and is now released. This is the disturbing case of the child who killed a child. In July 2018, 6-year-old Alicia MacPhail was abducted from her bed. She'd been staying with her grandparents in the Isle of Bute. She'd gone to sleep watching Peppa Pig and no one had any idea of the horrors that would unfold that evening. Meanwhile, 16-year-old Aaron Campbell was drinking with friends at his house. Aaron apparently became upset in the night because he had been arguing with his mum. He had had a challenging upbringing involving physical and emotional abuse. Aaron decided that evening he wanted to get some substances to smoke from a couple that he knew. The couple in question were Alicia's dad Robert and his girlfriend. They'd been known to sell substances to Aaron previously, but he could not get hold of them. Intending to go and steal them off them, Aaron armed himself with a knife. He headed to Robert's house where he lived with his parents and girlfriend. This was obviously where Alicia was staying that evening. When he arrived at the house, he noticed the 6-year-old sleeping in her bed and took the opportunity to snatch the poor defenceless young child. Disgustingly, he carried her to a secluded location, SA'd her and then killed her. He then disposed of his clothes in the sea. At 6 a.m. the next day, Alicia's grandparents woke up to discover that the little girl was missing. They straight away alerted police and locals. When the family asked Aaron to keep an eye out for the little girl, he texted them back saying, "Oh damn, I'm sure she's not went too far." A local man soon discovered Alicia's lifeless body around 15 minutes away from her house. Along with a lot of the local community, Aaron's mum actually checked her CCTV of her house. She was hoping that this would help with the investigation, and it definitely did. She saw her son leaving and returning from the house that night, and she handed the evidence over to police. Aaron was arrested and it was discovered that the clothes that he'd abandoned on the beach did actually match with his DNA. This case made me terrified to go to the cinema. This is the case of the horror in Screen 9. James Holmes was raised in California. His mum was a nurse and his dad was a scientist. From a young age, he was experiencing night terrors and allegedly actually tried to take his own life when he was just 11 years old. He was apparently obsessed with guns and weapons and had dreamed of becoming a mass murderer. Between May and July 2012, he legally bought 4 guns. Background checks were conducted and he was allowed the weapons. He also bought spike strips, which, if you don't know, pop the tyres of cars if they chase after you. On July the 19th, just hours before tragedy would unfold, James mailed his notebook to his psychiatrist. Inside the notebook, James detailed his plans to kill. The notebook was actually discovered later on undelivered. Just prior to entering a cinema in Aurora, James rang a crisis line to tell them about his plans to kill. However, the call was disconnected after just 9 seconds. At the midnight showing of The Dark Knight Rises, CCTV captures James walking into the cinema. He walks into Screen 9, props open the door and then walks back out again. Shockingly, he goes to his car and gets guns out and gas canisters. He re-entered the screen at about 12:38 p.m. and set off 2 gas canisters. When he entered Screen 9 again, he immediately opens fire on the audience, instantly killing 10 people. 2 others later died in hospital from their injuries. An additional 70 people were injured. This was an absolutely packed out cinema. James also shot at people as they scrambled to exit the screen. His youngest victim was a 6-year-old girl. Witnesses said this all unfolded as there was actually a gunfight on the screen, and initially they all thought it was special effects and just part of the film. Police were actually on the scene very quickly after the first 911 call. James surrendered to the police and was arrested in the car park. He was apparently very, very calm when he was arrested and told police that he had booby-trapped his apartment. When police investigated his apartment, this was found out to be true. He was sentenced to 12 consecutive life sentences.